and welcome back to another episode of the Games Gone By podcast. I'm your host, Adam, and joining me as always, the gaming expert enthusiast, Austin. Austin, how are you doing today?
Well, I'll say I've been better. We have some heavy topics this week.
We unfortunately do. I think we're going to start off with some of the saddest news of the week, and that's that the Dragon Ball Z creator, among other things, Akira Toriyama, has suddenly passed away. It may not have been super sudden for his family. I know he was dealing with like a brain tumor or something along those lines, but they announced it later in the week, despite him, I think, passing on March 1st, it was?
Yeah, March 1st at 68. I believe he had some sort of, I don't remember if it was brain tumor or what it was, but there was definitely some like health issue that he was struggling with, which was unknown to the public, I think. Like, I don't think anybody knew about it publicly.
Right. And Japanese culture tends to do that with a lot of their big figures. You know, we get TMZ on the scene before the person is like, the coroners, got the information, but they're a little more closed off that stuff over there. And yeah, I think it was really sudden for all the fans. We weren't aware of anything going on. And this is a guy whose influence is just massive. And, I didn't know a lot about his background, so I'm doing a little research before this episode. And he really just started as a guy that was like drawing pictures with his friends. And he, eventually got work at like an advertising firm. And he quit that job because he was like, I hate this. But
as I imagine many people probably would feel.
Yeah, exactly. And so he ends up submitting to these weekly Shonen Jump magazine contests. And eventually this kind of got him a little bit of recognition. And he ends up doing his first manga called Dr. Slump. Are you familiar with Dr. Slump at all?
I am familiar with Dr. Slump a little bit. I've never really read any of it, but I'm familiar with some of like the character designs, and I think the character Arale is actually from Dr. Slump, and she actually features in episodes of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. So like, He's actually woven kind of those things together a little bit. His old like Dr. Slump stuff with some of his newer Dragon Ball stuff, and I know that there's an upcoming game called Sandland that is from another property of Akira Toriyama's that kind of is inspired by Dr. Slump. So Sandland's a big deal too. So he's kind of done a lot in that same vein, building from Dr. Slump.
Yeah, I mean, really, like people just keep going back to his old works and pulling stuff out. I mean, he just has like a treasure trove of awesome stuff. But so Dr. Slump was really his first successful manga, and the editor at the place he was working at the time basically noticed that he had this huge kung fu passion, right? So like, you should try to combine these two things. And this became Dragon Boy, which eventually is what became Dragon Ball. So his love for those kind of kung fu movies mixed with his love for manga is kind of what spawned that.
As big of a Dragon Ball fan as I am, this is the first time I've heard that it started as Dragon Boy. So that's a really cool little nugget that I didn't know until you mentioned it here.
Yeah, assuming my Wikipedia research is not wildly off base.
Usually it's actually pretty accurate, so I'll believe it.
Yeah, but from there, I think the things he becomes most known for, obviously, the anime adaptations of Dragon Ball, and you get Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and
Dragon Ball
in the middle
Super.
Of all this, yeah, I mean, that becomes its own thing, right? But in the middle of all this, his that editor, that same guy, he was basically saying, you like all these different things, you should come work on this project. I know some people, and it turns out that was Dragon Quest, and that's kind of where he got started with video games. His connections there would eventually lead him to being the lead art director on Chrono Trigger, which we talked about in a previous episode. Awesome work there. His style is just so evident and so timeless that you can really feel his contributions to these video game projects.
Yeah, he definitely has one of those art styles that is like, you look at it and you immediately go, that's a Toriyama project. Like, he's just so, I don't even know the word, but it's such a unique quality to all of his drawings and all of his style that you just know it's him when you see it. And to have that distinct of a mark on like, not only like Japanese manga culture, but also like just pop culture in general. Like, who hasn't tried to like go Super Saiyan in their bedroom as a kid or whatever, right? I mean, who's not trying to like do a Kamehameha wave outside, playing in the yard or whatever? Like, these are staples for 90s and early 2000s kids, and to have created such like a massive pop culture influence with your work has got to be just one of the craziest feelings, and to lose that is really tragic.
Yeah, I kind of assume anyone in our age range that likes anime does so because they saw Dragon Ball Z on Toonami when they were a kid.
That's definitely for me. That is definitely my start with anime.
they had, so Toonami would have Dragon Ball Z, and then it would usually follow up with another one. Sometimes it was like Yu Yu Hakusho, among other things. And then they had the Adult Swim animes. They'd do some of the uncut versions. But Dragon Ball Z was the mainstay anime on Toonami forever. And like, I haven't watched Cartoon Network recently, but wouldn't be surprised if it's still there.
I remember watching Dragon Ball like with my dad as a kid. Like we would just sit down in the bed and like, or like on the couch or whatever, and just watch the whatever Toonami episode of Dragon Ball was on. Whether I had any idea what was going on in the plot, it didn't matter. Like it was like Dragon Ball's on, let's sit down and watch it, because it was just such a cultural moment.
And it was a fun thing to watch, that especially as kids, we hadn't seen anything like that, especially as American kids, right?
Right, for sure.
Yeah, the influence that he's had, we've already said this, but it's a point worth driving home. It's just so enormous. In fact, the Chinese government and I think the El Salvadorian government both issued statements this week about how horrible of a loss this is, which is
really
crazy.
I had not seen those. That's insane.
Yeah, so it's like state actors being like, this is a painful loss to, which is crazy. And you've mentioned here, there's other big animes right now that directly cite them as a big influence.
Yeah, for sure. Kishimoto, the writer of Naruto, has very blatantly stated that like Toriyama is his biggest influence, his biggest idol. Like he released a statement, a very heartwarming, like emotional statement. Ichiro Oda, the writer of One Piece, which is one of the longest going mangas since like 1996, and it's still active today. He's also cited him as a driving influence and has released a really heartfelt statement about the loss. Like basically anybody who's still writing shonen manga today can probably cite Akira Toriyama as their main influence for doing so. It's crazy what that genre has basically just become, like trying to capture that success of Dragon Ball again.
And it's really no wonder. I mean, it just took over the planet. I'm sure there were other big animes in Japan, but this was definitely the one that broke to the international audience. And I think that's just such a landmark moment for that entire art medium, really.
A lot of people call him the godfather of anime, and I don't think that's an understatement. Like, he is the person who started what anime has become today. Anime would not be the cultural like moment that it is, where it's cool to like anime now. People can talk about it and not get made fun of. Like, oh, you're the nerd who likes anime. And I go to work and I go talk to people like, oh, have you seen the new episode of Jujutsu Kaisen? And I'm like, yeah, I have. That's a thing we can talk about. Like,
he is directly responsible for its mainstream acceptance, internationally at least. I think is a fair thing to say. I was very glad we were able to get the Chrono Trigger episode out before this happened. As cool as it would have been to wrap it up as some kind of tribute, just not having the dark cloud of this hanging over us and us just being able to enjoy the game for what it was and his contributions. I was glad we could get that out.
I definitely agree. I mean, Toriyama was even actively working on things to this day. I mean, I know you mentioned in video game format, he was still working on Dragon Ball content with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which came out in 2020. A game that I actually, it had some problems, but I enjoyed it a fair amount, and having his direct influence in it was really nice. And he was even working on a project that was supposed to release later this year called Dragon Ball Daima, I believe. And it was almost like a reclaiming the GT story a little bit, because like I don't know how much you know about Dragon Ball GT or its history, but
isn't it not really faithful to his manga?
Yeah, it's kind of like Funimation doing their own thing post the end of Dragon Ball. Like they kind of take their own story and they like revert Goku back to a kid, and like it was not beloved by the fans. There's a lot of hate for GT out there, and Toriyama was actually working on this new series that kind of took some of the elements of GT. Like Goku actually reverts back to a younger form of himself in this due to some like conspiracy mumbo jumbo. I don't really know what they were going for exactly with it, because it hasn't released yet. But It was supposed to take some of those concepts that people didn't love in GT, and I think Toriyama was going to try and kind of reclaim them and make it his own. And I don't know what's going to happen with that show. I mean, I imagine a lot of it was already written because it was supposed to come out later this year. But I don't know what's going to happen with that. But it's really sad to think that if it was going to have a future, Toriyama can't be directly involved with it anymore.
Yeah, and if he's insisting that he was heavily involved with it, I would be skeptical that this is ever going to really come out in a satisfying form. But you never know. He may have been pretty far into it. We've seen this happen with certain projects before in like Hollywood and whatnot. Just depends how far along they are, and hoping for the best on that one.
I'd agree. It's a really sad loss for sure, and it's one that I took, as a huge fan of anime and manga, and especially Dragon Ball being kind of the driving force for my love of that stuff. This is a hard one, man. This is rough.
Yeah, like rest in peace, Mr. Toriyama. You will be sorely missed, even from even people like me who to me he's the Chrono Trigger guy because I was never stuck with anime.
That's even the fact that he can be known as the Chrono Trigger guy is a testament to how much he influenced different realms of pop culture.
And just thankfully he was so just pervasive in the medium and involved in so many things that his legacy will be around forever because these games will be around forever and these mangas and these animes will be around forever. And that's, it's a small silver lining in something like this when it happens so unexpectedly. But it's, I'm glad that he was able to have the career he did and he left that legacy behind.
And that kind of leads me into our next sad topic that that I is really personal to me. Rooster Teeth, a kind of multimedia company most known for Red vs. Blue, Ruby, and just a ton of other things like Achievement Hunter, all these things, announced on March 6th that it would be shutting down as a result of the kind of Warner Brothers Discovery merger and kind of some of the fallout of that. And Warner Brothers Discovery has said that they are looking for buyers for some of their popular franchises like Ruby and Red vs. Blue, but this is super tragic for me. I'm a big Rooster Teeth fan. I have been for quite a while, and this was tough when I read this. It kind of put a cloud over the rest of the day, honestly. Like I was pretty sad when I saw this on March 6th. You're actually the one who showed it to me. I didn't know until I saw the message that you had sent me.
Well, as soon as I saw it, I thought of you, man.
And I kind of went into a spiral. I kind of went into a little tiny spiral. This one's tough for me.
Kind of like we were talking about where Toriyama was the Chrono Trigger guy for me. Rooster Teeth was just the Red versus Blue guys. I think until 4 years ago or so when you first showed me Ruby, I literally didn't know they did anything else. To me, that's just that was who they were. Because, I saw Red versus Blue like season 1 back in the day when it was like the Machinima website was where all that stuff was.
Yeah.
And, there was no YouTube. I think you had to download them. Like you couldn't stream them on their website. Right?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff was initially posted like on roosterteeth.com. Like once they got like roosterteeth.com up and running, but I don't even think they had a streaming player at that point. It was just like you said, you had to download each individual episode.
Yeah. And looking, doing a little research for this episode, I just really got the full extent of how many things they were involved in. I mean, they had their big productions like Ruby and Genlock, which had big names like Michael B. Jordan in the cast and the voice acting, right? So they had those big projects, but there also, there were like numerous podcasts under their network. I think the article I was reading said 90 under their network. So that's some of that is like other people's stuff that they're hosting, and fair enough. But just a huge platform of content, all of these kind of Western anime influenced things. Of course, they were still doing Red versus Blue. I mean, they had a lot that they came up with over the last decade or two.
Yeah, they've done a ton of things. They've done a live action TV show called Day 5 that kind of follows this idea of like everybody in the world like falls asleep. Not everybody, but like anybody who is asleep, right? The idea is like at 3 a.m. in the morning or whatever, something happens and like nobody who is asleep ever wakes up again. So like the only people who are left like alive are the people who happen to be up at like 3 o'clock. So you have a lot of like drug addicts or like
insomniacs and night shift workers.
Yeah. So it's like this concept of like what happens to the world when only these people are like left alive. And then you also can't go to sleep. Like if you fall asleep, you will not wake up. So it's kind of this really interesting concept. And that's just one example of like something that you would never contribute to the company that made Red versus Blue, this like silly spin-off parody of Halo. But like, why would you ever assume they do something like this? But they did so many things like that. And they have such a breadth of content. I mean, you talked about their podcast. Even like, yes, a lot of those podcasts that they have in their network are like partners, but even their own podcast, they probably had 10 or 15 like regular podcasts that would come out every week that touched on all different types of things. They had a sports podcast at one point. They have several gaming podcasts, just like a general like lifestyle podcast. They had like a relationship advice podcast. Just such a breadth of content. Honestly, that could be part of the reason why things didn't last, right? I mean, when you spread yourself so thin and try and create so many things, do you put too much money into things that aren't succeeding?
I think especially when you consider how they got so financially successful in the beginning, they had this subscription service on their website they were calling First, which is a lot like what we think of like a Patreon now, but way ahead of its time, way before Patreon. You got sneak previews and you got early access to stuff, and you helped support the channel, and it wasn't, so you didn't have to watch ads and stuff. Like that was before I think everyone was pimping out their their projects to advertisements, right? So we're really ahead of the game in so many things there, whether it was the machinima animation, whether it was the kind of subscription services and crowdfunding. And I think, the announcement the guy made the other day said that we're down to 25% of our peak First subscribers, which is pretty bad. So
it's really not good.
You're probably onto something that maybe when it was a really cohesive handful of projects that someone could invest into all of them, like as a user, you might be into all 4 or 5 things they're doing, you might feel more compelled to pay those things. But then it becomes, okay, now what is my First getting me? It's getting me sneak previews on this podcast I have no interest in and I've never heard of. And maybe it just became a value proposition where it felt like, well, now that these things are on YouTube and yada, 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 what's the point of paying a First subscription in the modern era?
Well, yeah, there's also I read and I think listened to some other people talk about this because I've been pretty all consuming on this topic the last couple of days.
Right, I bet.
And one of the things that I think a former employee even said is that Alana Pierce, right?
Yeah, Charlazara, whatever.
Yeah, Charlana Zard, I believe.
There you go.
Yeah. She used to work for Funhouse, which is under the Rooster Teeth umbrella, and she said that when she was there, she was kind of there during the height of the First subscriptions that you were talking about, like when they were at their highest. Mm-hmm. And she was saying that the management of the company had a really hard time determining what they should be pushing for. One day it was push everybody to First. The next day it was okay, but now push them to buy merch from this thing. And there was no clear vision, and there was no they had a lot of managerial issues that kind of spawned from all the different things they were trying to do. And part of this could be because this company was founded by 4 dudes in a basement, playing Halo and then deciding, what if we just made some funny jokes about this thing and recorded it?
Yeah, it's an interesting transition when a company goes from that. It's truly a passion project, and then it starts making money, and you start having to hire people, and you start having to expand to justify all of this. And that's definitely not a bad thing inherently. You do want to get more talented people on board to produce more awesome projects. But I think eventually you get to a point where it's okay, we're now spending way more than we were when we were 4 guys in a basement. How do we make sure we're covering those costs? And unfortunately, that does mean you have to push all of this stuff, because if anything fails at that scale, it's over. And I think they didn't have a whole lot of huge bombs, but just over the years, the successes they had started to bring in less and less money and started to lose some of their luster. And you just get to a point where you're simply not running a sustainable business anymore.
For sure. And some of that definitely has to do with all the business side of things. The cost for all of these projects and the amount that they're coming in is a huge factor. But there has been a lot of controversy in the last couple of years with Rooster Teeth as well, that I don't want to spend too much time on. This is a moment to mourn the loss of Rooster Teeth.
#free Vic.
But there has been a lot of they've had a lot of accusations of a really toxic workplace, of a lot of the upper management and staff having some sexist, homophobic, racist tendencies. And there's obviously multiple perspectives on all of this stuff, but I think the one thing that has been pretty universally true is that very few people to come out of Rooster Teeth has said that it's been a perfectly flawless experience.
Right.
Very few people have left it and said that there's been no workplace problems. They've had some of their prominent on-screen talent get accused of repeated sexual abuse with not minors, but 18-year-olds who are barely legal, and like they kind of groom them into situations that are really uncomfortable at conventions and things. Like,
oh jeez,
just they've had a lot of this stuff come out over the last few years, and a lot of people I think have kind of soured on the brand because of that. And I know that kind of left people in a weird place of like, how much do I want to support this company? I like their content, but do I want to support the people? And, you know, a lot of those people have now gone. So the people who are left at Rooster Teeth are mostly the good ones, right? The good ones being kind of a weird way to put that. But the people who are left there are genuinely pretty good people from what we can tell. And it sucks that those, I think it's 150 full-time jobs that they said are going to be gone in 60 days. They have 60 days to kind of shut down the doors, if you will. They're going to kind of wind everything down. Then that'll be the end, you know? And then it's, okay, what happens next?
Yeah, and not to make excuses for anything that occurred, but sometimes when I read these things about these companies, especially ones that were founded by a bunch of dudes in the early 2000s, it's just not that surprising. When you think about what gaming culture in particular was like back then, it is crazy how much it's changed. Like, go open an EGM magazine, you know, like, what a ridiculous statement in 2024. You'll find an online picture of an EGM magazine from like 2003, and the ads are crazy. It's just, haha, my boyfriend likes to play PlayStation instead of fuck me. Isn't that silly? Like, and this girl's just in like lingerie on the bed while this dude's playing like SOCOM. And I mean, these were the advertisements in these magazines.
Literally on this exact same train of thought, I was listening to Bernie Burns, the founder, like one of the co-founders of Rooster Teeth, the writer of the first 10 seasons of Red vs. Blue. Like, he just recently started a new podcast. He kind of left the company a few years back and has been kind of like in isolation for a while. He just started up a new podcast called Morning Somewhere. And on that podcast, like in that podcast subreddit, I guess, I saw somebody post an ad or like an interview from EGM with Bernie's like wife, because she used to be like big in the gamer scene, and it's literally exactly what you're talking about, where it's like the world's sexiest gamer talks about like new games, and like just the questions are like just really uncomfortable, like sexual questions, and it's like, why are we doing this? Like,
dude, it's so weird. And it was just like, at the time, the internet was just horny teenagers, men. That's almost entirely what it was, right?
Yeah.
And so all of the content reflected that, and all the philosophies around things reflected that. And, you know, I think at the time, a lot of people just kind of thought it was harmless because it's like, you know, it's just a bunch of teenagers making content for other teenage boys. It's fine. And maybe it was, but eventually these things grow to the point where, like, your audience, not only are those boys becoming men and most of them maturing, but now you're getting women and people who didn't, even other men that didn't grow up in those environments. Like, you know, Gen Z did not have the same internet upbringing as like we had, right?
Right.
So you just get these shifts, and it's just not a surprise that some of these guys who have been working there for 20 years, who never had to grow up, never grew up.
Yeah, that's very true, yeah.
Not that I'm saying it was the four founders, I don't know who it was, but just imagining people,
For the most part, it seems like the founders are pretty good people. Like from what I've seen, they have some issues with their management skills, it sounded like, but like as far as people, they were pretty good people, is what it seems like.
Yeah,
and that's good to hear, right? And a lot of the people at the company still are good people, and some of them, I mean, have been with the company since they were teenagers, right? Like it's all they've ever known. Like people like Barbara Dunkelman has worked there for, I think, 13 years. She's the voice of Yang and Ruby, for your context. And she's like in her early 30s. Like she started working there at like 18 or 19. Like it was her first job. Like it's all she's ever known. And now these people are going to have to like leave and find out what's next and find out what's the future. And yeah, I'm sure that's a really scary thing for a lot of those people. I think from a consumer side, there's definitely a fear of what Warner Brothers / Discovery is going to do with Rooster Teeth projects that we know and love and have.
You just showed me an Excel sheet that blew my mind. It's like fans online trying to catalog everything Rooster Teeth's ever done because they just assume Warner Brothers is going to vaporize it.
Yeah, it's you know, I'm sure you've heard of like archive.org and like the kind of nonprofit like public repository, if you will, of like online content that's just it's sitting there. A lot of people have kind of gathered together to archive as much as they can from Rooster Teeth's long and storied history. and put it all on archive.org so that we don't lose it when Warner Brothers inevitably comes in and just wipes it all out. And like, hopefully that doesn't happen, right? But we've just seen with like things like Batgirl and like Coyote versus Acme, or two like finished movie products that they just like erase from history as like tax write-offs. And I don't know if you heard, but they're delisting all the Adult Swim games off of Steam.
Yeah.
Just completely vaporizing content. And I think it's a big concern for Rooster Teeth's like long history of content, because they just have so much, and for it to just get wiped out like that would be really tragic, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about it a little before we started recording. Warner Brothers has just made some interesting decisions over the last 10 years or so. And right now, I think they're just like hemorrhaging money, or they have so much debt that it's like, we have to get some amount of cash flow or we're screwed. And unfortunately, that means like, I imagine some of these Adult Swim games had licensing because of music or something else. And they're like, anything that costs any money right now, we're done with it.
Just get rid of it. Get it out of here.
Yeah, so that sucks. But I'm hoping that these Rooster Teeth IPs can find a home somewhere else, especially the numerous podcasts like
Ruby, Red versus Blue, and Genlock. I know we're all being shopped around, and I think of those, I think at least Ruby and Red versus Blue can possibly find a home. Genlock Season 2 was such a disaster that like I wouldn't be shocked if no one wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole. It was absolutely horrible. But I think Ruby is looking positive. That they had like a goodbye stream recently where it was like the first of several goodbye streams, and they said that like it seems like their Ruby is in good hands. Like they're making progress towards finding a buyer, and they're having multiple meetings with different companies and different things to like continue the IP and finish off the story. No one really knows like in what capacity that will take place yet. And they are also going to release the last season of Red vs. Blue. I think it's called Restoration, and it will be released in a few weeks. I think they said like spring, so it should be relatively soon that they drop the last season of Red vs. Blue, written by Bernie for the first time since I think 2012 or 13.
Okay.
So that'll be a really cool moment for like us to finally see the official end of Red vs. Blue. Like the series is taking so many like weird winding roads, and I know you said you kind of fell off at season 1, which like I get, but it's got such an interesting history, and it's gone from like this silly goofy parody series to like an actual like sci-fi drama into a weird goofy parody series again. So like it's kind of taken a lot of weird routes, and it'll be interesting to see how Bernie kind of wraps it all up. So it's cool to see these things happen and continue, but to see the company itself kind of go out of existence is really heartbreaking to me as someone who's been a big fan for quite a while.
It's one of those things I still haven't gotten used to with growing older, which is just seeing everything you loved as a kid die at some point. I made this joke the other day that my friend's like, dude, that's like the most depressing thing you've ever said, but it just made sense to me. I was like, you know how sometimes old people just look like deers in the headlights? It's because everything reminds them of someone who died. Like, you just say, hey, Grandpa, can we go get some apples? And they're just like, oh, I remember Johnny ran a general store and Sally sold the apples. And like, it's just, I'm getting that point now where it's like, there's so much now that I love growing up that doesn't exist anymore, people who have passed away. And then I can't stop. I get reminded of it by so many other things. And don't get me wrong, I'm not getting deers in the headlight looks here, but
not yet.
But that's life, man. We get up, we face the day, we learn new things, we experience new things, and we love new things, Austin.
We do. We really love new things. We love to experience new things.
And one of those things that I think both of us have been having a grand old time with, along with millions of other people clogging up the Steam servers, is Helldivers 2. Now, when did you first hear about this? Did you get part of this huge marketing campaign they sent out?
Man, I really don't know. I definitely saw some things start to kind of pop up whenever it like first was coming out, but I don't think I heard about it at all like before release date. Maybe like one or two little words of like, oh, Helldivers 2 is coming. And I was like, oh, that's that like weird top-down game from a few years ago that I never played. Whatever.
Yeah. So I don't get on social media that much anymore because I think it just pisses me off for the most part. But I do still
fair.
occasionally, yeah, I do still occasionally go to the gaming subreddit, and I saw a bunch of people talking about it, so I decided to check it out. And then while I was playing it, I had several people on Steam message me say things along the lines of like, "Oh man, is that game any good? I keep getting like Instagram ads for it, or TikTok, or this and that." And I'm fortunate to where like I don't use anything I have to see ads on anymore. I either don't use it or I pay for premium, so I just saw nothing. But I was like, no, that's really cool. So a lot of people were saying that marketing outreach really reached them, and I think it just kind of became this viral thing that these poor bastards who were expecting like 20,000 concurrent people got hit with 1 million overnight.
Well, I think so much of that in and of itself is just the tone that the game takes is very marketable. Like,
Yeah, and maybe we should start at the beginning for people who aren't familiar with this game. But why don't you just describe kind of its general premise?
that's a good point. Yeah, so Helldivers, the original, is kind of a top down like arcadey style like twin stick shooter, a game that I never even played. But the second one takes a different twist, and it becomes a like co-op third person like over the shoulder shooter where you're fighting like hordes of bugs or robots, and your goal is to like escape these hordes and like complete some missions and extract from the planet. That's really the entire game.
Yeah, it mixes in elements of like some of these horde shooters you've played. It mixes in like the extraction shooter mechanic. It's kind of this nice blend of shooter mechanics that works really well for a co-op system.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think, defining feature in my opinion is its tone.
Yeah.
It's very lighthearted. Like so many games coming out in the last couple of years, and understandably so, take a very like dramatic and dark approach, and there's this sense of like we need to tell the next genre defining dramatic story and like try and recreate the success of The Last of Us. And Helldivers 2 is like, nah, man, like we're fighting for democracy. We're trying to kill some bugs. Super Earth. Like you've mentioned Starship Troopers a lot, and I actually haven't seen Starship Troopers, so I can't directly speak to it. But it definitely feels like what I imagine that series, that franchise evokes, like that same tone.
Yeah, it's just this very over the top, like you could almost even call it like borderline like fascistic, because it's just this like we're here to take
true, though.
Yeah, take over the alien space and kill them and take their resources in the name of democracy. But of course, the propaganda is just a huge part of the like opening video and the loading screens, and it's just like, you know, it doesn't necessarily have anything deep or new to say about the whole thing, but it very much wears its Starship Troopers influence like on its sleeve in plain view, like pointing to it constantly, like, look at my new Starship Troopers sleeve, guys.
It's very much so.
But it's so much better for it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's 4 guys dropping out of like rocket propelled dicks hitting this planet and like you pop out, you call explosions and mechs and machine guns, and just the team killing is a blast. I mean, you're not supposed to do it, but it's impossible to avoid, which has led to some great viral videos on TikTok and whatnot.
It's so much fun to kill each other on accident. like, and there's so few times in this game where I get frustrated by being team killed, because it's always so like stupidly funny. Like I'll just be like running in the middle of a field, and our friend Connor will just like drop a bomb on all of us, and it's like, how did this happen?
And every 3 matches, it's a bigger bomb he's just unlocked.
And it's like he has no regard for where it's gonna drop, who it's gonna affect. It's just like, I see bugs, I drop a bomb. Like,
my favorite part of playing with him is, so you have to call in reinforcements to get people to respawn. And what I like to do is try to throw them maybe backwards or away from the enemies. And he's like, no, dude, the rocket pod can kill big stuff, so I'm using you as a missile. And I'm going to throw you directly onto the enemy charger, which is this huge bug, and see if you can't like drop pod onto it. Those are honestly fantastic moments. And it's great to have someone who's a little willing to be crazy when he plays like that.
Well, you know, every now and then you'll do something like that, and you'll just drop on my head instead. So,
oh, sure. Well, you were too close to the bug, man.
Listen, but no, and I mean that's really what's so fun about it, though, is just this idea that even when you're dying, even whenever you're getting team killed, there's so much like fun to it. There's so much like lighthearted, fun energy to it, where you're running around, you're shooting bugs. There's nothing deep about it. There's nothing like super complex and heavy. The mechanics are all very simple. Like, get bigger gun, shoot bug. Like, it doesn't get much more complex than that. Like you can like throw grenades in to like blow up bases and stuff. Like there's a lot of heavy emphasis on grenades and explosions in general, really, like calling down like orbital strikes to bomb all the bugs and things.
Dozens of things to call from the sky that blow up and set things on
so
fire.
Many and really that is one of the coolest parts of the game. I really like how all of these things that you call in are like little, almost like the Konami code that you have to put in every time you have to call it, which is really neat because it's not like just click button, call in thing. It's like you feel like you're in this moment of panic and you're like, I need to call in this orbital strike. Let me like tap it on my wrist real quick so that I can like drop in this huge bomb on this horde of bugs that's chasing me. And it just creates this feeling of like adrenaline that's so much fun to experience.
Oh, absolutely. They do so much with that because they blend in all these little mechanics that feed off of each other. So you have most of the guns are magazine based instead of round based. So you can't just spam reload. You have to be thinking about that. The explosions are everywhere. The longer the missions go on, the more enemies start to get thrown at you. And this all just culminates in like this extraction scenario where you're being overwhelmed and you're all just like, with your machine guns and throwing down artillery. And then the Pelican comes in. Of course, it's called a Pelican because this is just every sci-fi franchise.
Yeah, they are not shameful about it. It looks just like a Halo Pelican.
It really does. And I love those moments where you're fighting and the Pelican comes in and it manages to, because it starts laying down like covering fire for you as it's landing, which is a super cool touch and has both killed me and bugs that I needed to die. And oh, dude, I love it. It's one of those games where like it can be frustrating when you die and all it says is explosion and you're like, okay, whose, where's? Like I want someone to blame or some enemy to get vengeance on. But for the most part, you get respawned back in, you come in, you shout for democracy. The voice lines are so great. Democracy has landed.
It's so stupid, but it's so good because it's so stupid.
One of the loading screen tips is like, you might find alien artifacts if you search hard enough, but remember, curiosity about alien artifacts is like, that makes you a traitor. Even all of the tips are just branded in this over the top kind of propaganda. And oh man, it's a wonderful game.
It really is. And I think kind of what you mentioned there about it can be frustrating when you die. I think the way it alleviates a lot of that frustration is just by making like, no matter what you do, it still feels like you're making some progress. Like there's almost no way to completely fail. Like you'll almost always at least complete some objectives. Like, I've never had a game where we haven't at least finished the main objective. Like no matter what difficult, and we don't typically play on anything super hard, but
so if you fail to complete the main objective, you will just get no points.
Okay.
At least the ending screen says no points. Maybe you get like points in the moment when you do objectives. I'm not sure how that works. But as long as you complete that main objective, even if you were all then to die, you will like at the end of the day, it goes with the theme of the game. Like you are expendable, right?
Right.
Like,
I mean, I love the idea that like every time you get reinforced, it's just a new Helldiver.
Yeah.
Like it's not you coming back. You're just dead, and it doesn't matter.
It's someone else who happens to be wearing the exact same armor and weapons as the previous guy who died. But
which doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's fine.
Yeah, but it all just works into the game so well. So it'll be like mournful victory or like heroic sacrifice when you completed the objective, but you died. Because that's really what you're doing is you're sending a bunch of expendable Helldivers down to accomplish an objective, and if they don't come back, it's fine.
Right, as long as you get one step closer to defending Super Earth from the bug threat, it's fine. Like,
so the only thing I really want to talk about this before we move on is they had their first big balance patch recently. And God, that just reminded me of why I stopped going on like subreddits and stuff because Jesus Christ, the Helldivers 2 subreddit was an absolute train wreck of people with just the dumbest takes in the world. And like, don't get me wrong, you're totally free to like criticize a balance patch you don't like. There's nothing wrong with that. But I kept seeing the dumbest fucking takes. One of which was like, this is a PvE game. Why are you nerfing anything? Which I can't even begin to understand the logic there. Like you're telling me that just because it's PvP, you only ever need to push the numbers in one direction? What sense does that make? It just doesn't at all. And people were, mad. Like you know how gamers are on the internet, right?
Yeah.
So of course, you have this small company that hasn't gotten all of its PR sorted out yet. So you have developers arguing with people on Discord, and the community manager has to come in and be like, dude, what are you doing? Stop. Like, there's a reason I have a job, and it's because we don't let you nerds talk to the people. Because... And I say this as someone who had my job. I'm in the same position. I never talk to people. Thank God. I have other people who do that for me. And it's just like they're complaining about you don't understand the inner workings of this, blah, blah. It's like, of course they don't, dude. This is an angry 15-year-old on Reddit do not talk. Like, just avoid them.
Right.
Let your manager figure it out. Like,
just ignore the noise.
People were really upset that one of the guns got nerfed because it was the only thing that people could easily use at the highest level to solo matches. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? This is not a solo game. Just,
right, like you should not be soloing matches. So like that is not the point. I mean, that comes from me though, as somebody who like absolutely loves playing games by myself. I like that's not the point of this game.
No, this is not the kind of game to play by yourself. And I think people are already over it because they added mechs to the game. So now people are stopped crying about their railguns and just talking about how awesome the mechs are. So
I have yet to play with the mechs. How do the mechs work? Do you are they unlocked the same way that everything else is, or like do you get one by default? Like I've yet to boot up the game with mechs.
Yeah, so right now there's just an event going on where you know how you have the like free stratagem sometimes in a mission. So right now you can call down a mech like once per mission. Everyone can.
Okay.
I'm sure that will eventually go away because it's also a level 25 like unlockable stratagem.
Okay. Has it always been an unlockable stratagem, or is that like new with the balance?
No, they just added it. Yeah, they added a couple other things too. Like Connor showed me some new. It's like you throw something at it, and this red laser points at it for a couple seconds, and then this just freaking shell from space just boom hits it. Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, and I unlocked the giant orbital laser finally, which is a ton of fun.
Yes, the orbital laser is so cool. It feels a little OP if they're going to nerf something again. Maybe the orbital laser is the next thing, but...
It doesn't do a ton to the big guys, I think, is its balancing fact. And if it gets locked onto a charger, it's almost a waste because it just sat there on it the whole time.
Interesting.
But I'll just throw it near a light bug nest and run away because I know it's done. It will kill every bug.
It will destroy every bug, all the holes. It's gone.
But yeah, man, awesome game. I would encourage everyone to go check that out. I don't even think it's a full price game, right? It's $40.
It's $40, and I think that's been another big factor, and it's it's growing because people are more than willing to spend on something like this for 40 over like 70. You know,
when you have Suicide Squad coming out at $70 and this coming out at 40, it's a no brainer.
I don't want to go back into WB again too much because like we could talk about them forever. But did you hear recently that they were talking about like doubling down on like live service games and things?
Oh god, yeah. And I have to assume they want like a Candy Crush more so than they want like a Destiny. I think that maybe they've learned that lesson, but they still just think like, oh, these huge projects we have to invest all this time and money into. Fuck it, let's go build a mobile app with like 8 people in 6 months and see what monetization we can't get out of it.
And the sad thing is that it's possible that it will work, and then they'll feel vindicated in doing so.
The thing about huge AAA games, man, is you have to have the business sense and the creative sense working in tandem because they're just these huge projects that have to speak to people enough for someone to want to spend $70 on them. And when you do that, you get these huge amounts of money and success, and that's great. But like, you have to start from that level of what are we doing to justify someone buying our game for $70 over the myriad of things that cost 50 and 20 and 0. And I think
especially the 0 one.
The Suicide Squad I know that was a Rocksteady production for like years and years and years, but I just think Warner Brothers never quite realized like, oh no, people aren't going to just like superhero fatigue has already hit. People aren't going to buy this because there's Harley Quinn in it. It's not happening.
Right. It's got to be a good game.
And it wasn't.
Seems like that was maybe the part that they missed out on.
But we can talk about a different game who I think the creators of both on the business and the creative side of this have really figured something out. And that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Austin, just give me your first impressions of how much you're enjoying this game.
Oh man. I mean, the fact that I'm already into chapter 8 and have like 30 hours into a game that came out last week is a testament to how much I like this game, I think. I've pretty much played it nonstop, and it's hard to say that it's like super far and above what Remake was because of how good Final Fantasy VII Remake was.
Right.
But which we also recently talked about, dropped an episode like a few days ago for that. So go listen to that and then listen to this. Nice. What it does do new though is take the kind of linear approach that Remake had, because Midgar in the original game is very linear in tone, right? And it blew it up into this like these big vast open areas that you can explore and do activities in and have like side quests and mini games and all these things. And it took that core of the combat and the story and the characters of Remake and blew it into an open world that feels fun to explore and satisfying to engage with.
When they first told me they were taking my favorite childhood game and splitting it up into 3 sections to sell them all to me again at full price, I was definitely not thrilled, but oh my God, I've never been happier to be wrong. I loved Remake, Rebirth so far. I'm not all that far into it. I think I'm on like chapter 6 or 7. I would say spoilers, but I don't know if I could tell you what the fuck has happened up to this point. Ever since Sephiroth burned the village down, I'm just like, I don't know what we've been doing, running around gathering intel. I'm not sure. But it's been such a great time. I've had such a blast with the new systems, which was overwhelming at first, undoubtedly. There's like the synergy skills versus the synergy abilities, and the weapon skills versus the weapon abilities. And it's like, why didn't you just find a new goddamn word? But that's fine. Now that I have that figured out, I'm really like firing on all cylinders. I'm trying all these crazy combinations. I've already got my Tifa with nothing but purple materia. I've got my team that has 0 elemental materia. I'm just doing everything. I'm just having such a good time with it, dude. And
how many times have you already reset everything? Oh.
Not nearly as much as Remake, because you have to go to that stupid machine. And it's also just like the animations to pick things are actually like kind of long. And it's like, it's another game that gives me unlimited respecs while also giving me the feeling that they never want me to do it once.
That they don't want you to respect. Like,
yeah, but I kind of just get through that, slog through all the annoying menus and stuff, and just get new combinations going. Because to me, that's just such a fun part, especially when you have these characters who, this is such a good thing they've done from the original. They kept the like aesthetic feel in the character design to these characters like perfectly from the original, while also just building out what makes them unique mechanically. Because, in the original, everyone's got like a limit, and that's really the only thing that makes them different, and their weapons are different. But everyone's just got a regular attack. Your abilities come from the materia. So the only real unique part of each character are those limit breaks. Whereas in this, there's skills, abilities, just all kinds of stuff that separates them out from each other. And I've just been having a blast mixing and matching those combinations of characters.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Like, you can't run the same party of 3 the entire game and expect to like be able to take on any enemy like you could in the original, like as effectively, right? Like flying enemies are still most effective with Barrett taking shots at them, or, the certain things with like high physical resistance, Aerith can light them up with magic, especially with like her arcane ward that she can drop and let you like double cast everything. Like every character, just like in the last game, right? Like it's not anything new necessarily, at least in this element, but the ability for every character to be distinct and functional, separate from other people, is still just so impressive, especially with like new characters coming in, like Red 13 and Yuffie, which I know she was in the like Intergrade DLC, but this is her first time working in with like the party that you have, and her functionality is also really unique. And I mean, I really liked playing as Yuffie because you have all of her ninjutsu that you can change the element of. So you have all those elemental weaknesses brought into just her one character.
And the second I saw that, I knew I was building a team with no elemental material. I was like,
you're like, perfect, getting rid of every spell.
It was like, materia is obsolete now. We're on ninjutsu. But yeah, and I think just the little tweaks they make are so well done. They've added all of this additional capacity for Cloud and Tifa to do aerial attacks, but they're still just never going to be quite as good as like hitting him with magic or Barrett using his gun. But it's still viable. And so I think they've kept people's strengths in line while still kind of just like mitigating people's weaknesses a little bit. Because there was nothing worse than like a fight in Remake where you lose your other 2 party members and now you're just Cloud fighting something in the air and you don't have the elemental materia you wanted.
Oh my God.
Like that was just the worst. So I think they've done a good job kind of circumventing that from popping up.
I would definitely agree, and I think the game still does that thing that Remake did, and it does it pretty well here, is like splitting your party up and forcing you to take certain people with you. And it doesn't happen too often yet, which I appreciate, but it does happen a couple of times where you have to take certain people with you to fight certain situations, so you get to experiment with other characters that maybe you wouldn't normally bring in, just because the game is forcing you to do so.
Yeah, and there's sometimes you even get a choice, right? There was that fight on the beach where it was like, do you want to go over here and fight with Tifa and Barrett, or you want to go over here and fight with Aerith and Red? And it was like, okay, you're at least giving me a little bit of a choice. But sometimes they don't, and I think they do a good job kind of mixing that up so that sometimes you are like, okay, I need to actually learn how red works because I still haven't 12 hours in. Cool.
Right. Which I really do enjoy the way red plays, just in like him kind of being fast and like being able to like dodge a lot. And I like his like Stardust Ray ability that like causes that big like circle ball of death. It was pretty cool. So I do like a lot of the combat tweaks. I think synergy skills are particularly interesting. The ability to kind of work with your partner and generate ATB faster for the non-active party member.
Yeah, that was a good touch.
Is so useful. And I almost still wish the ATB generation was a little bit faster, but like it is what it is. I understand that they need to have some balance and some incentive to like swap characters around a little bit.
It does still feel painfully slow for your unselected characters, but once you start getting some of those synergy skills, and then also, like right now, I have this ridiculous setup on Tifa, so it's like the first strike materia, something in her folio that says increased ATB, and then an accessory I got. She just starts with almost 2 full ATB, which immediately becomes a haste spell, so then she's just overloaded on ATB. So then she buffs herself up with bravery, and then she does unbridled strength, and maybe after that point, Cloud's gotten to attack once, I don't know. And so I just have her like going Super Saiyan immediately, and then I'll use the other 2 characters to cast elements if I need to. But she has some fun synergy with Cloud, so I can get his ATB up. It's just I think they've really done a good job giving you some more options. Even if I'm not a huge fan of like the whole folio thing compared to the old weapon skills, I would probably trade that in a heartbeat. But it's fine. It's close enough. I can still respect it. It's good.
As long as it can be respect, you're okay.
Yeah.
And I would agree with a lot of that. I do think a thing that this game has that the last game kind of dabbled in a little bit, but didn't do nearly as much as this one, is just the amount of like miscellaneous like mini game type content that comes with this game. There's so much of it.
There really is. And, you know, if you go back to the original, it was definitely full of mini games, as kind of 7, 8, and 9 all were at the time. It was just that kind of PS1 era thing. But 7 probably had more than the other 2. And then this version, I think, has more than the original 7. They've just kind of gone all out with it. I love it. I think they're a lot of fun.
I would say this game has more mini games than any game I've maybe ever
played in your life. Like, other than like what WarioWare is that?
Yeah, a game that is literally just mini games. Yeah, it is really one of those things where like no matter what you're doing in the game, there's some like new fun little twist that it's bringing in. Like there's like a shooting gallery mini game that literally just turns into like a little like arcade shooter game where you're like shooting targets. And then there's one of the best card games I've played in a while, and that's Queen's Blood, which I love Queen's Blood. I know you love Queen's Blood.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And then there's like a little tactical game in Fort Condor that was kind of featured in the Intergrade DLC, the Intermission or whatever it was called. And also like a rhythm game that you play piano. Like literally so many different options that they even made a Rocket League clone.
Yeah, like, it's like 4-way Rocket League, and it's actually kind of fun as hell.
It is kind of fun. And I know you probably haven't gotten there yet, but there's like twist on a lot of those mini games in Costa del Sol too, that you can get like during a side quest. So
I am very much looking forward to getting to the Golden Saucer, like more than anything else in this game.
I just made it to the Golden Saucer. That's like the next thing I have to do is I'm literally about to go play all the mini games in the Golden Saucer. So I'm really excited to see what that is like, because there's so many different activities to do in the world. Even outside of mini games, like there's a bunch of combat encounters that you can do. There's like explore to find these like summoning stones that'll help lessen the battle against the summon materia. Like so many different things that you can hunt down and find while playing this game. It's really filled with content for sure.
And there's so much of that side content that one thing I'm so glad they did is they put in a dynamic difficulty mode. And I think that's entirely for people like me who can't possibly leave an area without doing everything, and just to prevent me from out-leveling every story encounter. Because now that I didn't quite finish all of Junon before moving on, but now that I can come back to Junon, I'm like, all right, I'm finishing this entire area before we move on to the next one. And I love doing all the little things. There's actually they're not like Witcher 3 level side quests, but there's some reasonably well-written side quests in here, usually involving like someone complaining about Shinra but not having the ball to do anything about it, and Aerith being like, but what if you made a difference, man? And then you do. And there's just I love all the stuff in the game, man. I've had such a good time with it. My complaints, I was listening to our episode that we put out the other day about when we played the remake, and there's a few things they didn't include that I was hoping, such as like loadouts.
Where are loadouts? Oh my god!
Crazy to me that they don't have loadouts. But
like how are we not at loadouts? And granted, I will say that you don't have to change party members as much as the last game, at least up to this point. Right?
And you have the party like combination slots you can switch between.
Yes, which is cool. And they do give you like a lot of materia, so it's like not like I don't have enough materia to put on everybody.
Right.
So it's not like it doesn't feel as bad as it did in Remake, but it's also still like, where are my loadouts? Like,
and then I know I was saying I really hoped for like an overworld map resembling the old school one. We don't so much have that as we just have a lot of connected open world areas, and I think that's fine enough. I've kind of gotten that same sense of progression with it, especially with the chocobos doing different things in each area. That kind of feels kind of Metroidy.
Yeah.
I don't really know how you would have done the overworld anyway, so I can't say I'm super disappointed. I think they've at least opened it up enough to where they understand what the point of Disc 2 was. And
yes, for
so
sure.
I'm down with it.
And I like the way that this kind of forces the game into a naturally interesting pacing, where it's like, here's a big open world section, and then we're gonna funnel you into a more like linear set piece type designed section, and then now we're gonna open it back up again and let you like explore, and then we're gonna funnel you into a more like linear path again to kind of give you that part of Remake that was very linear story driven, while also giving you the chance to explore the big open world that kind of Disc 2 was known for.
Yeah, and I think I'm even getting into a lot of the character development, even though, like, again, I've just lost such sight of the main plot. I need to go read something about it. But the little character moments I've really been enjoying. There's this bit where you're in, was it just the Nibelheim Hotel maybe? Or maybe it was like the next area you're in, but Tifa and Cloud are kind of getting in this little argument almost because Tifa's like, yeah, man, you were not there.
Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but that wasn't you.
And Cloud's like, yeah, it was. And they're both sort of upset with each other for not believing the other one. But then they kind of come around a few scenes later and they're both just like, yeah, we just have to, trust each other and try to figure out what the hell's going on. And besides, we have Sephiroth to chase, so we'll deal with this later. But yeah, and I've just enjoyed a lot of those little conversations. There's some really cute stuff between Aerith and Tifa where they're like talking about like boys. And
yeah, I thought that was really cute too. Like they're just like we gotta talk about boys.
Yeah, and then Red like dresses up as a person to play the card game.
Dude,
they won't let dogs play.
I lost it when I saw Red come out.
He's like moonwalking. Yeah. Dude, oh my god.
The game is it's so over the top, and it really does harken back to some of those sillier moments in the original FF7 that you kind of forget about, because the overall story of this game is pretty heavy. Like, I mean, it's about freaking like eco-terrorists, right? Like it's a pretty heavy concept and story, but there's so many like lighthearted, goofy moments in the original, and they take those and they really, really just go full into it. Like they don't shirk away from it. They don't try and like pretend it's something else. They just really lean into these kind of goofy, silly moments. For example, right, the part where you're riding the dolphin and then like get kick flipped into the sky to like land on the boat or whatever. I was like, there is no way that was in the original FF7. And I went back and I was like, yeah, no, it was. That happened. Like,
it just didn't have the full on like mini game before it.
Right. And the like full on like this, the dramatics of it is so funny, where you're just like the dolphin like leaps and it's like slow mo and it's like quick time event press buttons to get like kick flicked into the air, and it just looks so dramatic. Yeah, and kind of the same thing for like the Junon parade, where you're going on like a full like choreographed like military like sequence. It's so over the top, but they just really lean into it and own it, and they're like, this is what Final Fantasy of the PS1 era kind of was, like these really serious heavy topics, but leaned in with a lot of these like silly goofy moments that kind of made a distinct experience that wasn't just super heavy.
The Junon thing I think is a great example because I mean that's like a 20-minute segment in the original, and all you really do is try to like walk in line with other troops moving. They blew that up into like a 3-hour romp of going recruiting a whole squad and practicing formations and stuff. And at first I was like, I hate how they pad everything out, but every time I get through it, I'm like, oh, that was great.
Because it's super like they just really lean into all of the. Like what they pad out, they really just like full dive into it. Like I loved in that section, in the Junon section, like going up to the bar to find the troopers hang out in there, and then you just see like Elena sitting at the bar talking about how sad her life is. And she's just like, leave me alone, I'm sad.
And I loved how like some of the troopers would be like, oh, it's the captain, and others are like, who are you interrupting me? And someone's like, look at his helmet, idiot.
Yeah.
Like, how do so many of you not know what a fucking captain looks like? But
I know. I love the part where you're like, you see like Rude hanging out and he's doing like something suspicious, and you like follow him in, and he's just like in this like full like bald like group of bald people. They're at like a barbershop, and they just do like this whole like barbershop quartet sequence.
It's like this weird underground combination of like a bar and a barbershop, and the only people allowed to hang down there are bald people. It's the most crazy thing ever. And it does, yeah, I mean, to your point, the original game did such a good job knowing when to be serious and when not to be, right? Like, it could go from recruiting a guy like Kate Sith and going to the Golden Saucer to, you know, the most famous video game spoiler of all time. When Aerith dies in Cloud's, I can still remember the text bubble. Like, Sephiroth starts to talk, and Cloud just says, shut up. Like, shut up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm done with you. And he's you know, a character that hasn't had a lot to him up to that point, and he's so angry. And they did such a good job with that. And I'm really looking forward to getting to those heavier scenes, because right now, for the most part, I would say the game has been more goofy than otherwise for me.
It definitely has. But even, I mean, we talked about that in our remake episode. Mm-hmm. The same thing, we kind of felt the same way. Like, the beginning of the game's a lot more lighthearted. It's a lot, like, sillier, and there's not too much dramatic content. But as you get towards the end of it, that drama really starts to ramp up. And I have no doubt that this game will do the same thing, because it kind of goes in line with how the original does, too. Like, the end of this game is going to lead into a lot of that stuff, a lot of that Aerith Sephiroth stuff, at least we believe. So, like, it'll be nice to see if it kind of takes that same trajectory of, like, here's the really serious, dramatic tone.
Yeah, they're giving you that time and space to enjoy a lot of what you remember about the game and why it's so memorable to you before making you realize why you really remember this game and why these characters have actually held up the test of time. And so, yeah, I think they're going to do a good job with that, simply because, you know, I know I had my complaints here and there about the Force Ghosts and everything, but for the most part, I thought they did a good job making the story something that is familiar but different enough. And it really is a game that as a whole is not trying to replace the original game. And I think that's cool.
No.
Like, no one's ever going to say, oh, this is the best way to play Final Fantasy VII. It's just, this is a way to play it.
Right. And it's a great way to play it, and you should play it, but you should probably also play the original as well. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not like Ocarina of Time 3D, where I'd be like, just play that version of Ocarina of Time. Like, it's just way better in every way. Like, this is a new take on this story, and it's one that so far I've really enjoyed, and I can't wait to finish it. I'm going to finish this podcast and go play it right away. So
I would too. My sister's coming in town this afternoon, which, like, fine, I'll spend time with my family. But we'd all know what I'd rather be doing. So.
Right. We'd all definitely rather be playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Well, all right, man. Is there anything else you want to touch on with these?
I mean, I think that's it. You know, we started off with some pretty heavy topics, but I think we rounded it out with some really great games that you should go play if you haven't been playing them already.
Yeah, and, you know, the name Rebirth, it's just so symbolic with this episode, because it's like we started off with some deaths and some company deaths, but this game is just bringing new life to a franchise that, I mean, frankly, never really needed it. It really could have stood on its own, but I think the fact that they're making a whole second, like, wing to this story that is still so incredible is just awesome, and huge props to everyone involved.
Yeah, there's going to be so many people that discover Final Fantasy VII through this game, and I think that's super cool to think about.
Yeah, I saw a post online of someone complaining about the mini games. Like, I'm playing this game to slash things with a sword, and I was like, "You didn't play the original," which is fine.
Obviously, you're not a OG FF7 fan.
Yeah, but that's good. I'm glad there are new people experiencing this for the first time, and I hope they enjoyed as much as I've been. Well, that about wraps up this episode, guys. As always, we appreciate you listening, and you can look forward to a full-length retrospective with the full crew at the end of the month covering Remedy's Alan Wake. As always, you can follow us on social media at the Games Gone By podcast.
Or email us at gamesgonebyradio@gmail.com.
Signing off for the Games Gone By podcast, I'm Adam.
And I'm Austin.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Do 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 do.